The night my husband shoved my suitcase onto the porch and told me I was no one worth fighting for. Something inside me cracked so loud, I swear the whole street could hear it. I'm Arlena Merrick. And that was the moment I realized the man I loved had been rehearsing my disappearance long before he said the words out loud. I thought that was the worst betrayal I'd ever face, until the day a banker looked at my father's old card, froze, and whispered, "Ma'am, you have no idea what's been hidden from you." I had lived in Denver most of my life, but that winter carried a different kind of cold. Not the sharp sting that bites your skin, but the quiet, creeping chill that settles in your bones long before you notice it. The same kind of cold that had been living in the walls of my marriage for years, silent, patient, unyielding. During the day, I poured my energy into East Range High, guiding students who were trying to untangle who they wanted to become. Listening to them gave me a sense of purpose, something steady to hold on to when everything else felt suspended in a strange, breathless stillness. Their hopes were loud, messy, alive. Mine had gone quiet. Evenings always brought me back to the Craftsman house Grant and I had shared for 15 years. 2 stories, dark wood siding, warm lights that never seemed to reach the corners of the rooms. The house stayed spotless, almost museum-like, because most days it held more silence than footsteps. Grant traveled often, and even when he wasn't traveling, he spent his nights in his office, the glow of his monitor washing out any trace of warmth on his face. Our dinners grew shorter, our conversations thinner, our touch a memory that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I could feel something rotting beneath the surface, something we both pretended not to smell. Still, a part of me clung to the belief that effort could fix anything, that shared years meant shared endurance. I didn't know then that some things don't crumble slowly. Some things fall in a single, violent break, like a beam snapping under a storm. And on that night, as I walked through the door with snow melting on my coat, I didn't realize I had only a few hours left before everything I knew would be torn away in one sudden, merciless shift. The next evening, I walked into the house expecting the same quiet half-light, the same stillness that had become our routine. Instead, every lamp in the living room was blazing. Grant stood in the center of it all, his posture straight, his shirt perfectly pressed, as if he were meeting a client instead of his wife. Beside him were 2 strangers, a man with a briefcase and a woman in a long coat holding a thick stack of documents. He didn't greet me or ask how my day had been. "Sit down," he said, his voice flat, clipped, final. I didn't even manage to slip my bag off my shoulder before the woman stepped forward and placed the papers in my hands. Dozens of pages, divorce petition, lists of assets, instructions for dividing accounts. I thought we still shared. Clauses about the house and the cars, every detail already filled in. My signature was the only thing missing, almost an afterthought. There had been no argument, no breaking point, no conversation where either of us admitted things were falling apart. Just this, the cold machinery of a decision made long before I was allowed to know it existed. I asked why, though my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. "We've been done for a long time," he said, not bothering to look at me. The room felt suddenly smaller, like the walls had shifted closer. I wanted to stand up, to walk out, to give myself space to breathe. But the woman beside me nudged a pen toward my hand. Her tone was soft but unmistakably firm as she said everything needed to be completed tonight. Outside the window, snow had begun to fall silent, gentle, almost mocking. When I refused to sign, Grant unlocked his phone and showed me an email from our bank. My access to our joint account had been removed that morning. I had no idea. No warning, no chance. I stepped into the garage, trying to steady myself, and found my suitcase waiting by the door, zipped and neatly arranged. Not thrown, not rushed, prepared. As if my leaving had been planned down to the minute, I signed, not because I agreed with a single word on those pages, but because the truth hit me with the same cold that seeped through the windows. I had nowhere else to go, and he had positioned every piece exactly where he wanted it. When I stepped outside, the icy wind hit my face so sharply it brought tears to my eyes. Grant stood framed in the doorway, his expression unreadable, and said the last thing he would say to me as his wife. From now on, nothing ties us together. The door shut behind me, and just like that, the life I had built for 15 years ceased to exist. I found a room at a small motel in Aurora, the kind with a flickering neon sign and a parking lot filled with cars that looked permanently stalled. I told myself it was temporary, that I only needed a night or two to regroup. But the nights blurred, and the room's walls seemed to inch closer with each passing day. The carpet smelled faintly of dampness. Muffled arguments drifted through the thin walls. A draft crawled under the door, no matter how many towels I pressed against the bottom. The room felt like a holding place for people who had run out of choices. One evening, searching through my belongings for anything I might sell, I opened a wooden box I had carried since my father passed away. Inside were pieces of a life that felt impossibly far away, a photo of us during a mountain camping trip when I was 10. His old pocket knife with a rusted hinge, a brown envelope, and a faded plastic card from Mountain Federal Credit Union. I remembered him mentioning it once, only briefly, when illness had already weakened him. I'd been 25 then, too wrapped up in my own life to understand the weight of his words. Inside the envelope was a single line written in his careful, uneven handwriting. Arlena, it's time for you to find your path. I sat still for a long moment, tracing the letters with my thumb, feeling something shift inside me. The card looked ancient, almost useless. Yet the message felt intentional, as if he knew I would reach a moment where everything familiar had been stripped away. A quick search told me Mountain Federal still existed, though that the branch my father once used had closed more than 20 years ago. There was no reason for this card to matter, no reason for him to leave this message to a future version of me he could never meet. And yet, alone in that cold motel room, the card warmed in my hand as if it carried more than its plastic weight. Something in me recognized it not as a clue, but as a direction. The next morning, I decided to take it to the bank. I had no idea that choice would unravel everything I thought I understood about my father, and about the man who had pushed me into the snow. Downtown Denver felt colder than usual that morning, the kind of cold that sneaks under your coat and settles there. I walked into the Mountain Federal branch expecting nothing more than a quick explanation about an old card. Maybe a forgotten savings account, maybe a clerical error. Instead, the moment Halper scanned it, the air in the room shifted. The machine let out a low, unusual tone that made him freeze. His eyes narrowed at the screen, and whatever he saw drained the color from his face. Oh, without saying more than a strained request for me to wait, he hurried toward the back offices with surprising speed. A few minutes later, it wasn't Halper who returned. A silver-haired manager appeared, inviting me to follow him through a door marked for authorized personnel. 2 security guards stepped aside as if this was a protocol they rarely used. My pulse thudded in my ears as I was led into a small conference room with an old computer humming quietly. He asked for my ID, studied it carefully, then looked at me with a gravity that made my stomach twist. "You are the daughter of Thomas Merrick." I nodded. He turned the monitor toward me. A trust account, created in 1982, locked under the highest security until a financial emergency triggered its release. My father, who had lived modestly his entire life, had built something elaborate and hidden beneath everything I thought I knew. When I managed to ask how much was in it, the manager spoke slowly, as if easing me into cold water. 72.4 million. My breath caught, and tears blurred the screen before I could stop them. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. Someone attempted to access the account 2 months ago. The trace led to Merrick Logistics, Grant's company. The realization hit like a punch to the ribs. I left the bank knowing the ground beneath me was not only cracked, but rearranging itself entirely. When I returned to the motel, a woman stood waiting outside my door. She introduced herself as Miriam Cole, the attorney assigned to oversee the trust. Her calmness felt like a rope thrown to someone treading water. Inside, she placed a thin folder on the bed and told me I needed to understand what I had stumbled into. Grant's plan hadn't begun last week or last month. He had been preparing for a year. He shifted assets out of reach, opened new accounts without my name, and hired a private investigator to dig through my past. He wasn't looking for closure. He was searching for value. The investigator found nothing useful. Miriam said, not enough for the kind of leverage he wanted. That was why he tried breaking into the trust. The attempt came from his company's network. My hands trembled. I asked what I was supposed to do. Miriam slid another document toward me, older and worn. My father had structured the trust so no spouse could ever access a cent of it. He built it as protection, anticipating a danger I never imagined. I thought of him then, his tired hands, the quiet way he loved me, the things he guarded without ever naming them. My eyes burned. Later that evening, I stepped outside for air. Across the street, a black SUV idled with its headlights fixed on me. I didn't need to see the driver. Grant was done hiding, and the fight he wanted was no longer about marriage. It was about control. And I realized, standing under the cold glow of the streetlight, that he had no idea I finally had something he couldn't reach. I thought the fear settling into my life after the bank meeting was the worst of it, but that feeling that turned out to be only the beginning. The next morning, when I crossed the motel parking lot, I spotted the same black SUV from the night before sitting in the far corner. Its headlights were off, yet the engine ticked with lingering heat. Someone had been there moments earlier. I opened my car door, and footsteps scraped behind me. Grant's voice cut through the cold, rough and shaking with anger. "Arlena, stop!" He looked nothing like the polished man I once came home to. His coat was expensive, but everything else about him was unraveling, his hair disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his expression wired with panic. "Why are you avoiding me? You know what I'm talking about." I stepped back, and he moved closer. "You found it!" His voice wavered, not with sadness, but with pure rage at losing control. He pulled documents from his coat, waving them like a weapon. "The court hasn't finalized anything. I can still take back what's mine." I told him the truth he hated most. The money had never belonged to him. His face darkened, and he leaned in as if he could intimidate me into reversing reality. "You have nothing. No support. No lawyer." I told him he was wrong. The moment I said it, something in him cracked. I climbed into my car, locked the doors, and drove off as he kicked the tire of his own vehicle. But he didn't stop. The SUV appeared outside the school, outside the grocery store, outside the motel. Some nights, the low rumble of an engine jolted me awake. Miriam only said the truth I'd stumbled into was far larger than I realized. She showed me documents confirming Grant was drowning in debt and had siphoned company money for personal use. Merrick Logistics was under quiet federal observation for insurance fraud. If I chose, I could buy his outstanding debt and collapse his company in 2 days. Then she handed me the files from the bank servers. My father had designed the trust to be untouchable by any spouse. Ever. Divorce or marriage didn't matter. He had built it as a shield for a future he somehow anticipated. That night, I locked my motel door twice, knowing he was somewhere in the dark. This fight was no longer about money. It was about control. Miriam's office overlooked the rush of downtown, but inside, everything felt still. She placed a thick binder in front of me and said my father had prepared for this decades before I understood what danger looked like. Inside were pipeline agreements from 1982, signatures of executives I recognized from headlines, and my father's name beside theirs. Tucked among the pages was a handwritten line stating no one would ever use his assets to control his daughter. The weight of those words pressed deep into me. Miriam showed me the activation triggers he'd requested: my credit being frozen, a drastic drop in income, or divorce proceedings, even in death. He'd set mechanisms in motion to protect me. The next folder revealed Grant's attempts to exploit my past opening credit files in my name, sending investigators to distant relatives, preparing for divorce only if I turned out profitable. The final file showed doctored invoices, fake partners, and financial manipulation long hidden from the world. The law was no longer on his side. When I stepped out of the building, sunlight flashed against the Denver skyline. In that moment, I knew exactly what Grant wanted. Not the money, the power to decide who I was, and I was finally ready to take that power back. I didn't sleep that night. Miriam's documents lay across the motel table, the lamp casting harsh light over every detail that exposed how deep Grant's deception ran. Each page felt like a weight pressing on my chest, daring me to act. By morning, I was back in Miriam's office. She slid a new folder toward me, her voice steady as she explained what it meant. I could buy all of Grant's bad debt from the commercial bank. One signature. 48 hours later. Merrick Logistics would collapse under its own corruption. No loopholes, old tool. No appeals. A clean break that would erase everything he'd built. You can do this, she said. The law is on your side, but your conscience has to be as well. I picked up the pen, and my hand trembled. Memories flashed in quick, sharp bursts my suitcase, waiting in the snow. Grant's voice tearing at whatever confidence I had left. The nights I heard his engine idling beneath my window, and my father quietly repairing the worn boards of my childhood room so I would have a place to grow. I set the pen down. Not this way. Instead, I opened my laptop, gathered every file proving his fraud, and sent them to federal regulators, tax authorities, transportation investigators, and the families he exploited. I wasn't seeking vengeance. I was choosing justice. 2 weeks later, everything detonated at once. News alerts lit up my phone like sparks jumping from a live wire. Investigators had launched a full probe into Merrick Logistics for transport and financial fraud. Families who had been ignored for years filed collective lawsuits. Federal tax agents began combing through records I had already seen with my own eyes. Grant vanished in the chaos. For several days, he left no trace, no calls, no engine idling outside my window, no sign of the man who once stalked every step I took. Then, one night, a soft knock echoed through the motel hallway. I didn't open the door, but his voice slipped through the cracks. "Arlena, please, I need to talk to you." Fear still sparked in my chest when I heard him, but I had learned how to keep it from steering me. I stepped into the hallway. Snow clung to his coat and hair, melting down his collar. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes sunken, his lips cracked from cold and panic. He looked nothing like the man who once told me I was nothing. The arrogance was gone, only the consequences remained. "You know this won't stop with me," he said, voice shaking. "I need help. You could pay the debts. I'll pay you back." I saw clearly then not the husband I once tried to love, but a man undone by his own choices. "I had the chance to destroy you," I said, "but I didn't. I only sent the truth where it needed to go." He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "I've lost everything. You did that yourself, Grant. Not me." His shoulders caved in, his breath hitching like a child's. "You won't save me." I shook my head. "No. But I won't push you further either." We stood in the falling snow. Two people who no longer shared anything, not a home, not loyalty, not even anger. When he finally turned and walked away, his steps uneven, something lifted inside me. Not triumph, not satisfaction, relief. For the first time since the divorce, I felt myself standing firmly on my own ground. I left Aurora as soon as I learned Grant's business license had been suspended, and the courts were beginning to summon him. The motel key felt strangely heavy in my hand when I returned it, as if it held every restless night I'd spent listening for the sound of his engine outside. I wasn't going to live next to that shadow another day. I drove north toward Estes Park, the place my father once took me camping when I was 10. The closer I got, the lighter the air felt. The Rockies rose like a wall of quiet strength, and the scent of pine followed the curve of the road. By the time I reached the small cabin I rented, I felt something inside me loosen. Mornings were slow and gentle. I made coffee and watched the fog lift from the peaks, sunlight spilling across the valley like a promise. Evenings I spent drafting plans for the Mountain Path Foundation, a small program meant to support truck drivers and women blindsided by financial manipulation, the same way I once was. I didn't pour lavish amounts of money into it, just enough to give others the steady ground my father had once given me. A week later, I drove to the mountain cemetery where he rested. Snow dusted the granite stones, soft and quiet. I placed the wooden compass he'd carved for me beside his marker and let my hand rest there. You knew I'd need this long before I did. A breeze moved through the pines, gentle, almost warm, and for a moment it felt like someone brushing a hand across my shoulder. I smiled through the sting in my eyes. "I've found my way. Dad." When I stood and looked toward the sun rising over the Rockies, I felt the world open instead of close. No Grant, no fear, just a horizon that finally belonged to me. I didn't just survive, I began to live.